Hey all, I almost did this video as Beelzebub, but my voice cannot handle it today. I am going to make this shorter. I know I always say that, but this time I'm really running up against my voice. But I got to do this before I forget, because I forget a lot. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. If you like this sort of data analysis I'm going to do today, funding helps a lot. So what we are talking about today is the Feminist Frequency Report on gender representation in gaming. And I am going to give their numbers the benefit of the doubt. I have reason to not be 100% certain. So I say this is a caveat because of their data collection methods, because of the imprecision in some of their language, and because they don't actually list the games they covered and how they ranked them. A lot of the times, they're for instance taking Gears of War as a female-led game. We don't know that for sure. The Gears 4 jumped around protagonists, so you played as different people in different parts of the game. The player 2 character was selectable, all that stuff. So there's certain things that we don't quite know from the teaser trailers we saw. They're working on assumptions, which scientifically, scientists don't tend to like assumptions. And so this is just a rough estimate. They don't even use the exact same methodology year to year from 2017 to 2018. I'll show you that in a bit. So caveat emptied, right? Even with that, they actually did gaming a favor here. They just don't realize it. They got so fixated on a single number that they didn't interpret it in a wider context. And that's what I'm going to do for you guys today. And in light of that, these are actually pretty good numbers. And they haven't budged. They haven't changed much from 2017 to 2018. But that maybe because there's really no reason for them to change. So let's jump in and have a look. Here we are. Games by Gender 2018. You will see that as Feminist Frequency says, they are right that it hasn't changed much from 2017 to 2018. The notable change, and that's why I said they didn't even keep their methodology the same, they added a gender ambiguous category, which seems to have pulled from the non-applicable area as well as the multiple genders category, because both those have kind of lost a step. There are slightly more games this year than 2017, but it wasn't like 2016 where there were only 59 games instead of over 100. Now, in fairness, half of those games came from the Xbox press conference. They showed over 50 games. So that's a real elephant in the room statistically. Like, Xbox has a very distinct mandate. I would be very interested in seeing the numbers with that pulled out. And then people are like, you can't pull out the Xbox press conference, but Xbox has a particular marketing bent that PlayStation and Nintendo do not share. And that's why if this were like an actual scientific breakdown done by like an actual think tank or actual like proper researchers, the data would be broken down in multiple ways, including by conference, including by genre. And that genre is exceptionally important. And this is the first point of how these numbers are actually pretty good. Console gaming and the games that tend to come out on console and PC tend to be primarily male audience base. Men prefer shooters, action adventure, strategy games, things like that. Women prefer match 3 games, puzzle games, hidden object games. I love my puzzle games, but that's about it, and I am an anomaly in that I like you guys have seen the games I play. They're not typical for women, but there's about a 3-to-1 ratio. And this is a huge generalization. It goes up and down by genre, but most of these like genres that are popular with console games have about a 3-to-1 ratio of men to women. That means there's about 75% men, 25% women. So for every 3 men that are playing a game, there will be 1 woman. I'm repeating this over and over and over and over again because look at the data. If you take only the piece of the pie that deals with distinct binary gendered protagonists, we have a 3-to-1 ratio. It's bang on. It's exactly where it should be based on the demographic that plays console-driven video games. The fact that there is that much more of the pie that either allows people to choose their gender, it is somehow irrelevant, or a game is deliberately doing an experiment with a gender ambiguous protagonist. I hope they counted Toad's Treasure Tracker in that, because Toads don't actually have gender. They just gender perform. But the fact that there is so much where it's basically irrelevant or there is a choice, they're making a big deal out of the minority of cases instead of the majority. And even in that minority of cases, it completely lines up with the people who are purchasing these products. So what's the problem? Well, the argument Feminist Frequency gives is that, where is it? These games work to normalize the notion that male players should be able to project themselves onto and identify with female protagonists, just as female players have always projected ourselves onto and identified with male protagonists. That is a sweeping generalization that is not necessarily true. People have a different relationship with a first-person protagonist and a third-person protagonist. People do not feel like they are Lara Croft. They feel like they're helping Lara Croft. I do not feel like I am Kratos when I'm playing God of War. I feel like I am a god controlling Kratos's actions. Saying that a player is projecting their own experience onto a playable character fails to actually understand fundamental aspects of third-person perspective game design. And I'm not going to say what that means. You can come to those conclusions yourself. What I just thought wasn't pretty, which is why I stopped myself. I don't need to do this. They're doing it on their own. Now, that 24% number is statistically relevant for another reason. Because when we look at how well an industry is doing, we definitely look at it on its own and go, how well is it doing serving a diverse group of tastes? Well, I think that it's doing very well considering half of all products allow choice. And what is gaming supposed to do? Offer choice. There are other games where I maintain the gender of the playable character is utterly irrelevant, and that's like a lot of first-person games other than Far Cry. I mean, Far Cry 5 was interesting in that they allowed you to play as a woman, and it didn't really matter much. I'm sure they did it as a marketing tactic. It did influence how I played the game some, I realized, but only in a minor way. The 24% number of males, okay, which Feminist Frequency is saying is this gross overrepresentation because people want to see themselves in media. That's very strange when you look at what a lot of people consider the major media competitor for dollars with video games, which is the film industry. And sorry about the glaring white screen. It's this website, because this is the statistics about women on screen. The most recent data we have, because 2018 isn't over with, so 2017. Look at the number of women who compromise sole protagonists. 24%. 24% of all movies, 37% of major characters, and 34% of speaking characters. See, I'd like to see breakdowns like this in games as well, because sometimes the playable character is not the most important one. But this is considered a bad number in terms of representation. 24% of women. But it's supposed to be considered some proof of male dominance in games. Now, gaming has something that films don't have. In a movie, you don't get to pick the gender of the main character than you do in 50% of games, or it makes you cycle through characters, or whatever multi means. This is significant. This means that gaming is doing so much better than films. So much better than films. In films, if you look at that number, overall audiences were almost twice as likely to see male characters as gaming characters. Male characters as female characters. Almost twice as likely. That is not so in this. It's not. Most of the time you get to pick. So if you don't want a dude as your main character, you don't get a dude as your main character. So what are we complaining about here? Well, it doesn't make you look very good when you have like a donation thing at the bottom of every page. It really makes it seem like you just want people to give you money. But what we have here, to me, is an industry that is effectively serving the consumers it has. The number of female gamers is growing. I mean, when I started doing this stuff, some of these genres, especially the RPGs, it was like 90% male instead of 75% male. It's really come up a lot in the number of women playing Western RPGs. So we have an industry here that is accurately reflecting and providing an appropriate amount of content that represents the people who play the games. Now, I don't know about racial breakdowns. I would think that there should be a lot more Asian people in video games based on that. But then you get sort of Japan makes them all look anime, and anime is kind of its own race. But it doesn't seem to me like there's a huge problem. And if you'd asked me if data that Feminist Frequency collected would convince me that there's actually less of a problem than I even thought there were, and I am not a the sky is falling type here, I would have thought you were crazy. But here it is, Feminist Frequency's numbers, one more time, showing us 3-to-1 ratio of male to female players as an estimate. 3-to-1 ratio of male to female hardwired protagonists. Everything else is not relevant, gender ambiguous, or you can choose. And I would like, and this is where we come to, well, what does this mean in terms of, the sort of work I do? Well, this is just a quantitative thing. This is just raw numbers. There's also depictions of various male characters and depictions of various female characters and everyone in between or outside those boxes. And I think we can definitely be a little bit more interesting in the way that we offer these experiences. Many people in my own content pointed out that there seemed to be a lot of women crying or looking frightened when they were front and center. I'm looking at you, Gears of War, as opposed to men not being in similar, imperiled situations. These qualitative things are a heck of a lot more interesting than a numbers crunch that doesn't show any real issue. If the number of female console gamers continues to rise, and the numbers don't shift accordingly, then I'll be right back here going, no, not okay. But under current numbers, this is not cause for concern, just because we're not looking at general population like we are with movies, right? Movies are pretty much everybody goes to movies. Men go to movies, women go to movies. It's, so when you look at an industry like Hollywood where everybody goes to movies, so the number of people overall in movies, is even because it's representative of the population. When you've got an essentially 50-50 split with that, 1-2% for gender nonconforming people, and you only have 24% female protagonists, then you've got a problem. Then you're not representative. But, we don't have that in gaming. We've got a split, and I'm repeating myself a million times because I want to get this through. We have a representational split that accurately depicts who is playing the games and in what numbers. Gaming is not about mind control. Gaming is not about convincing you one way or the other to like violence or dislike violence. A lot of the very violent video games I play are often quite anti-violence in their message. Even Grand Theft Auto, which I've said multiple times, is not my favorite thing in the world. I just don't personally find them fun. Even that, it tends to be... certain Grand Theft Auto games do this better than others. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is an example of a protagonist, CJ, who is not offered any good choices. So the game is an experiment in navigating one form of... it's criminality versus corruption. Basically, you work for corrupt cops or you sort of, become more of a gang leader. But there's no good choice. There's no uncorrupted law and order, straight arrow choice in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I can't say that's true with Grand Theft Auto 4 and Grand Theft Auto 5, but San Andreas did that really, really well. So even then, that's not glorifying violence. That's examining violence from an honest perspective, right? The Doom game, the modern one, the early one didn't have enough to it, but there's nothing wrong with killing enemies that are trying to kill you. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the feminist frequency thing, and I'm not going to crunch these numbers because I'm like, please, actually, maybe I should take a few minutes to explain my issues I have with these graphs, the combat versus non-combat games. Okay. And yes, non-combat games it's again, about 3-1, skewed a little bit, but okay, here's the thing. And this is when I start getting a headache with this crap. There's a ludic structure for anything that's a game. Okay. You have to have, take football or basketball or baseball. You have two teams competing against each other. Now, you can call this a competition or you can call this combat. If you listen to sports commentary, they often use the language of combat to describe a competition. And in terms of the actual game part of a game, that is what combat serves. You are basically having a competition. It's paintball. We don't consider paintball or laser tag combat, but really it kind of is. But it's more of a competition than a combat environment. And, a game like Rabbids Mario that I love, nobody dies. You're saving the rabbits. You're fighting them to save them, but you're saving them. Is that considered combat even though nobody dies? It's not so simple. The reason the bulk of video games are combat driven is because that is the easiest way to simulate the basic game mechanics so that people can actually recognize it as a game with rules and win-loss conditions. There are other ways to do it, certainly. But coming down on video games for having a lot of combat is like coming down on sports for using balls. How else you gonna do it? Sure, they could toss around a stuck pig, but that'd be kind of cruel and messy. A ball's just convenient. It's the same thing with combat. And I have not found even the military games that I have played to terribly glorify violence. A lot of the games treat violence as sort of a necessary evil. Or you're just a freaking sociopath monster killer like in Doom. Love Doom. Or it's sort of, there are games that actually allow you to sneak around combat using a stealth option. A lot of the Tom Clancy games that Ubisoft puts out allows you a ghost mode, meaning you can be totally non-lethal stealth all the way through. I like to play it that way because it's more of a challenge. So the combat statistics, I guess, knock yourself out. I don't find them terribly meaningful because of that ludic component. And so I hope this helps you. If you get somebody who throws these articles at you now, maybe this will help you sort of turn their appreciation of them differently. So to recap, we are not dealing with gender parity in the player base. We're about 3-1, male to female, which is still, 25% is a sizable minority. Also, the ratio of atypical members of a gender, by the way. So it's very possible that more typical males and atypical females are playing video games, and that's important for the games that are developed for those female players. Could we do more to bring in more typical women? Yeah, the Japanese do a much better job of that. But, can we do more to maybe bring in atypical men? I think the market is kind of saturated on video games. I think it's more we need to bring more women into console games because there's a lot to offer than worrying about attracting men. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's my bias. But yeah, we are effectively serving the consumer base as it exists. I expect that to evolve with the changing numbers. The numbers are shifting. But I'm sure if you saw a breakdown of Facebook games or mobile games, I would suspect you would see a gender skew far more towards women than men. I could be totally wrong, but if there's a similar skew in mobile games, then we have a problem in that space. Meaning if it's not representative of the demographics that are actually playing, then I'm going to complain. But when it's lining up this neatly with the percentages of various types of people that play, in the interest of gender, of course, I don't know about race, but that's all right. I'm not going to complain about that. I'd rather focus on meaningful portrayals and better, more nuanced portrayals of both male and female characters and everything in between than arguing a numbers game. Because again, according to these numbers, I don't see a problem.